Hey guys, today we're going to talk about the political spectrum, which if you look at the front of the classroom, it's that big, long piece of paper with red and blue paper on there, and it says left, right, conservatives, liberals, and independents, as well as moderate. So we're going to talk about that today because eventually you're going to be placing yourself on that spectrum. So the political spectrum is a tool used to visually compare people's political ideology or their beliefs in government and politics by placing them on one or more axes. We will use the one axis political spectrum, but later in the trimester, we'll talk a little bit about the double axis where there's an X and a Y axis because we can tell a lot more about a person's political philosophy and ideology when we place them on that. But for simplicity, our country a lot of times just uses the single axis political spectrum, which looks similar to this, right? In the United States, we mostly use this one axis political spectrum that places a range of beliefs along a horizontal line and is described in terms of left, to the left of the center, and right of the center. So most commonly, the political spectrum tells us two things, right? And this is, we can't tell, if we look at where somebody's placed on a political spectrum, we can't tell everything about their political ideology, but we can gain a pretty good understanding of their view on two major things that will impact their decisions on other things. So first off, how much change in government is a person is willing to allow, right? And also how fast they would like to see that change, as well as how much do we feel like the government should intervene or get involved in the lives of people, both socially, but in particular with the respect to the economy. So how much regulation should there be on business and decisions about money and taxes and things like that. So a couple general assumptions we can make based on those two things. If you're on the left side of the spectrum, you can assume that person believes in more government interaction and that they want more change in government as well. So government's going to be more involved in our lives, and they're going to change the way government and the economy and things are run throughout our country. If you're on the right side of the political spectrum, most likely you're going to believe that you want less government interaction. You want government involved in your life as little as possible, especially in the economy when it comes to your tax dollars and your paychecks and things like that. And people on the right would also argue that they want little to no change in the status quo, meaning they want to keep things the way it is, right? Let it be. Let society make changes. We don't need the government to legislate change. You will also notice that the left and the right side of the spectrum also align with liberals or conservatives. So the left side tends to be the liberal viewpoint, and the right side tends to be the conservative viewpoint on the American political spectrum. So liberals are a political idea or view that is based on belief of progress and considers government as a critical instrument for removing social problems, right? That government is there to remove the problems that we have amongst each other. And they also believe government is good, that government should be there to progress and make change and to stop people from being treated unequally. Conservatives, on the other hand, on the right side of the spectrum, it's more of a political idea or view that is based in a belief of respect of traditional institutions, right? Like, let's respect the way things have always been. They've worked, they've got us to this point. And that's important to make sure that we respect tradition, both in government and social problems as well. They also believe in the power of personal freedom, that people's individual freedoms and liberties should be above the power of the government. And they're a little bit more opposed to change in how we do things, right? Because they like that traditionalism that we have here in America. Basically, conservatives would say, look, the individual is good, and their needs is more important than the needs of the government, right? Change is bad, and freedom of choice is good as well. So that's kind of our differences between liberals and conservatives. So a quick recap: liberals on the left side of the spectrum. The left is used to describe people who support change in society and government interaction, while people on the right usually have the political ideology that refers to people who hold traditional values and want government less involved in their lives. We can see on the spectrum here that depending on where you fall, right, the further right you are, the more conservative you are. The further left you are, the more liberal you are. And the more moderate you are, or the more towards the center, the more overlapping your views tend to be. So we're going to go through and talk about radicals, liberals, moderates, conservatives, and reactionaries real quick so we can gain a general understanding of the differences between those. So a radical, they're way over here where this star is on the far left side of the political spectrum. And these radical liberals would call for wide sweeping rapid change, right, in the basic political, social, and economic system of the United States. This is your Bernie Sanders, a self-proclaimed democratic socialist, right? He wants to see drastic change in the way that we govern and that our economy runs in this country. And he's willing to resort to more extreme methods to bring about change. Bernie Sanders, for example, is not willing to bring about the use of violence, but possibly a political revolution, right? However, another example could be like Malcolm X, for example, during the civil rights movement. He had very radical types of views about the inequalities that African Americans faced, and he was willing to use violence and revolution to see that change happen rapidly. Whereas we compare that to a general liberal, somebody maybe like Martin Luther King Jr., he's going to reject violent revolution as a way of change, and he's going to realize that we need to use our government, that we need to be peaceful to make gradual change within our existing political system, right? So we need to protest. We need to petition our government. We need to get new laws passed. So use the things that are already in place to see this more gradual type of change. If it happens quicker, awesome for liberals, but they realize it takes time. So lastly, this first point, government should be actively involved in the promotion of social welfare of the nation's citizens. So that it is the role of government, a liberal would say, to get involved in social problems and make things more equitable for people as a whole. If you're a moderate, you fall smack dab in the middle of the political spectrum. And most likely you're going to share viewpoints with both conservatives and liberals. So you're kind of in between, right? That's why you're in the center. You tend to be tolerant of other people's views, both the liberals and the conservatives, right? Because you kind of can see both sides. But you advocate more of a go slow approach. Like, let's wait and see. Let's see if we can come to some sort of agreement between both the sides. And let's not move too drastically. But sometimes change is necessary. Then we have our conservatives. Conservatives are between the far right and the moderates, and they favor keeping things the way they are, or as we said earlier, maintaining the status quo, right? They're usually a lot more hesitant about the idea of accepting new policies that are going to completely change the way government works or the way government views society. And they feel that government should be smaller, that the less government there is, the better. The less government interferes with our lives and our businesses and our money-making decisions, the better society will be. They kind of believe in like a free market, right? Don't get government involved in minimum wage, for example. Let the free market decide that. If a company pays their employees very poorly, people won't want to work there, and that company will fail. And that's kind of what the conservatives said. Like, we can set a minimum wage through the free market. And finally, we have reactionary, otherwise known as a radical conservative, right? They're far right on the political spectrum, and they want to go back to the way things were a long time ago, the good old days, right? I'm sure you've heard this before. The way things used to be socially, the way things used to be economically, the way things used to be with isolationism of the United States, that sort of thing. And they're often willing to use extreme methods to get there. So once again, the idea of power grabs or finding ways to create methods to grab the power and use the power to achieve the goals that they see. So how do these fall with the political parties, right? We've talked about how they fell with conservatives and liberals, but let's talk about political parties, because eventually you're going to be declaring yourself a Democrat or a Republican. So the two major U.S. parties are the Democrats and the Republicans. Democrats generally are seen as liberal because they support government regulation of the economy, right? And so they're going to fall usually to the left of the spectrum, where Republicans generally are seen as conservative because they advocate for a reduction in government. So most of the time, Republicans are on the right side of the spectrum, Democrats on the left. But oftentimes, you might see somebody really close to the center. We have a lot of moderate Democrats, a lot of moderate Republicans, and they would fall to the close to the center, and sometimes even have some beliefs. If we had a political spectrum for a certain issue like abortion, you might see some Democrats crossing over the center line to the right side and being a little bit more pro-life, or vice versa. So that can happen as well. So within parties, there are people who hold a variety of opinions on social and economic views that fall along the spectrum of political ideologies. For example, there are liberal Democrats, there are moderate Democrats, there are moderate Republicans, conservative Republicans, and that's important to realize, right? Not all Republicans are the same. Not all Republicans believe the same thing. Same thing with the Democrats. So let's talk quickly about some of the current issues that are out there and where they would fall. So most people on the left side of the spectrum, to the left of center, would believe, yes, we need some sort of gun control to curb some of the gun violence that we have, and that gun control is okay. Having more regulations on the guns we can buy and the guns that we can use is a good thing. Most people on the left are pro-choice, meaning that they believe it should be the woman's choice to decide whether or not she wants an abortion, and that the government should not stop that right. People on the left would say no censorship, that our government, our schools, our advertising agencies shouldn't censor information because it's something that they find to be inappropriate or something that they find to be maybe too controversial, right? Or something that they don't support. That we need to allow people to freely express themselves through all mediums. People on the left would say prisons should be there to rehabilitate, that the goal of prison is to help people get better and make better decisions in the future, so that eventually when they get released, they can be released into the world and make better decisions and be an addition to society rather than somebody who's going to go back to jail. They're pro-privacy, so things like the NSA, the government, looking into our emails, listening to phone calls, those sorts of things, in order to keep a more safe country, they would say no. We should never violate the privacy of individuals for the safety of our country. And they believe in amnesty for all illegal immigrants. In other words, they would say, look, there are a lot of illegal immigrants here already. They have established lives here. They have established families here. And if they are good, hard-working people that are adding to our economy, they should get amnesty, meaning they should be allowed to stay here and be given a path to citizenship. And lastly, public school funds. They would say, look, our public schools are funded by the taxpayer, and therefore those taxpayer or those public funds should stay in public schools. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to school choice on the right side or the conservative side. Some people on the left side of the spectrum are going as far as to say, look, I would like to see college be paid for by public school funds as well. So there's a lot going on with the public school funds currently. Let's go to the right side. They're pro-Second Amendment, right? If you're a hard-nosed right-liner, you're going to say, look, I have the right to keep and bear arms, and that shall not be infringed upon, that shall not be restricted, and therefore these gun control regulations that you're trying to set up are a violation of my Second Amendment to carry guns. They're pro-life. They believe that life begins at conception, and when the sperm fertilizes the egg, that's when life begins. And any sort of abortion during that time period is considered murder, and that all life deserves a chance to live. They tend to be anti-flag burning because of the symbolism behind the American flag, but that really is more of a free speech issue that people on the left and right side of the spectrum can disagree upon. But they might not say we want a law against anti-flag or against flag burning, but they would definitely say that they don't like it. They believe prisons and our prison system is in place to punish those who commit crimes, right? That we're not there to help them make them better. We're there to punish them for their crimes against humanity or their crimes against society. And that should be the number one purpose. Not that they would completely be against rehabilitation programs in those, but the number one purpose is to punish people who break the law. They would like to limit illegal immigration. Conservatives would say, look, we have way too many illegal immigrants from all over the world in this country, and those people are breaking the law. And they need to be punished for the law that they broke, whether that's through deportation or whether that's through fines. Most would not be for amnesty like many of the people on the left side would be. Some are, however. That's starting to change a little bit. But they would also say, look, we need to stop illegal immigration from happening. We need stronger border control. We need a wall. We need enhanced security at the borders. We need more border security. We need, and that not just our southern border either, but our northern border as well as our borders by air and sea. We need to be more careful about the people we're letting in to make sure that they are going to be contributors to our society, is what people on the right would say. And lastly, school choice. People on the right would say, look, we want to give people the most options they can into getting a good education, because we believe that a good education is key to a good life. So if people are living in a bad area where the school is struggling and they don't necessarily have the best curriculum or the best teachers, they should be allowed to go to another school. Open enrollment. I'm sure some of you know people who do that. But they would take that a step farther, and they would say we should also have what we call school vouchers, which basically is saying each individual student at Sauk Prairie High School gets roughly $10,000 from the state that goes to them Sauk Prairie School District to pay for teachers, to pay for the utilities, to heat the building, to pay for curriculum tools and textbooks and computers and all of that. They're saying if you don't want to stay at that public school, you should be able to take your $10,000 that district gets and go spend it on tuition at a private school in the form of a school voucher. And that is a huge, huge debate that people on the left and the right are having currently. All right, so that covers it for current issues. In class this week, we're going to talk about some more specific things and where left and right fall, especially considering things like distribution of wealth, the economy, business regulation by the government, social problems in America, taxation, how does each side view taxes, religion, foreign affairs, and lastly, the scope of government. So I look forward to learning more about that with you guys in class. Have a good one. Thanks for watching.